Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I was on all fours, scrubbing the tiles until my hands were slightly numb from the cold floor. The quiet hum of the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the window filled the room, but then, just as I reached for a stubborn stain, I felt it, a light brush against my hip. My breath hitched. I froze, instinctively tensing, yet the warmth from that brief contact lingered like a spark against my skin. I dared a glance over my shoulder. His eyes met mine, dark and steady, holding me in a charged silence that made my heartbeat race. No words. No hesitation. Just that slow, deliberate awareness between us, as if we were both testing boundaries we'd only whispered about in fleeting glances. The corner of his mouth lifted in a subtle, almost mischievous smile, teasing without a sound. A shiver ran down my spine as I shifted slightly, trying to keep my cool while every nerve seemed suddenly alive. The space between us felt smaller, every breath heavy with unspoken tension. I caught the faint scent of his cologne, something warm and familiar, wrapping around me and making my senses dizzy. The room, once quiet and mundane, felt electric, each second stretching longer than it should, every brush of his presence magnifying the pull between us. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but my fingers slipped on the tile, my pulse betraying me. He didn't move, didn't speak, he just lingered, the way someone does when they know they've noticed something worth savoring. The silence between us was louder than any words could be. My mind raced, imagining what he was thinking, feeling, daring, yet restrained by some invisible line neither of us had crossed, yet. And then, as if the universe had conspired to heighten the moment, he leaned closer, just enough for the warmth of his body to brush against mine. I could feel the electricity, a mix of fear and thrill, and I knew something was about to shift. Something that would change the air between us forever. My hands froze mid-motion, and the camera of my mind captured every detail, the tension, the tease, the closeness. And just like that, he pulled back slightly, leaving me breathless and the question burning in my mind: what was he really thinking? The brush of his hand lingered longer in my mind than it had on my skin. I sat back on my heels, pretending to rearrange the cleaning supplies, but my pulse still hammered in my ears. He leaned casually against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes tracing my every move. There was a familiarity in the way he looked at me, one that cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Years of quiet glances, subtle teasing, and moments we had both denied meant more than friendship. We had history, of course. A complicated one. Moments where laughter had felt like the safest thing in the world and moments where words unsaid had piled between us like unmovable furniture. I remembered the first time I realized he saw me differently, not just as the woman who shared a laugh over coffee or a sympathetic ear in late nights, but as someone who stirred something forbidden, something thrilling and dangerous. The thought made my stomach tighten. He pushed off the doorframe and moved closer, and for a heartbeat, I imagined him crossing that invisible line we had always danced around. But instead, he leaned just enough for his shoulder to brush mine, accidental or not, I couldn't tell. My mind rebelled against logic. Every touch, every glance, every fleeting brush was a spark in a room long dimmed by routine. Yet beneath the tension, there was vulnerability, a softness that hinted at longings we hadn't yet voiced. "You've been quiet," he said finally, his voice low, almost teasing, yet edged with something I couldn't name. I tried to shrug it off, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Just focused on the floor," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they rang hollow. He saw right through me, as he always had. There was a pause, charged and thick. A memory of a night months ago came to me, one where we had lingered too long over wine, hands brushing in the soft candlelight, and the world outside had disappeared. Back then, we had pulled away from each other, fearful of what closeness might mean. And yet, here we were, in this mundane room, and the same pull existed. A silent acknowledgement of our shared desire, our shared restraint. I felt a flicker of nerves, heat rising to my cheeks, but also a thrill at the tension. Every small movement, every quiet interaction, held the weight of what could be, what might be, and what neither of us dared voice. There was no rush, only the slow building of something impossible to ignore. And as our eyes met again, charged and silent, I realized the truth I had tried to hide. No matter the cracks, no matter the years of restraint, no one else had ever made my heart race this way. Not with a touch, not with a glance, not with the quiet electricity that hung between us like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The room felt smaller somehow, intimate, suffused with possibility. And I knew, without a word spoken, that this moment, this tension, this closeness, was just the beginning. I caught him glancing at me again, but this time there was something sharper in his gaze, a flicker of possessiveness that hadn't been there before. My chest tightened as I realized how much I cared, how much it mattered that he noticed me, and only me, in that small, mundane moment. The way he shifted, the subtle tilt of his head, the quiet exhale he let slip when I laughed at a clumsy slip of mine, all of it felt dangerously intimate. Jealousy pricked at the edges of my thoughts. Not at anyone in particular, just the idea that someone else might see him the way I did, the way I secretly wanted him to see me. That heat rose again in my chest, mingling with the lingering thrill from our earlier touch. My fingers brushed the floor, but I couldn't concentrate. Every nerve ending seemed to vibrate with the awareness of him nearby. He moved a little closer, ostensibly to pick up a dropped rag, but his presence loomed, pressing against the fragile walls of my self-control. I could feel the warmth of him, subtle but undeniable, brushing past me as he reached down. My heart raced, and for the first time in years, I considered what it would be like to let go of restraint, to meet his intensity halfway. There was tension in the air, a mix of attraction and conflict. We were both aware of the line we hadn't crossed, but neither could look away. Every glance, every shift in stance, every brush of air between us screamed of something forbidden waiting to be explored. And yet, fear and longing tangled inside me, each fighting for dominance. He straightened, letting out a small, almost inaudible laugh, one that sounded equal parts teasing and knowing. I felt heat flood my cheeks. The room, once ordinary, now felt charged, small, intimate, like a stage set for an unspoken confession. Our silent dance continued, neither of us moving away, both of us testing the edges of desire and decorum, aware that one wrong move, or one brave move, could change everything. And just as I thought I might slip, my eyes met his again, and the world narrowed to just the two of us, suspended in a moment of delicious danger. I didn't know if I should step back, or step closer. The room felt smaller now, charged with a tension that made it impossible to think clearly. I was bent over the floor again, scrubbing a stubborn streak of grime, but every motion seemed amplified by the awareness of him close behind me. He had moved just a little too near, his shoulder brushing mine as he leaned casually, yet deliberately, over the counter. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, my pulse hammering with a rhythm that felt almost unbearable. "You're focused," he murmured, his voice low, teasing, but carrying an edge that made me shiver. I dared not meet his gaze fully, but the corner of my eye caught him watching, waiting, calculating. My chest tightened as I realized how close we'd allowed ourselves to get, how fragile the line between control and surrender had become. Every subtle movement, his hand brushing against the counter near mine, the slight lean of his body toward me, felt electric. My mind spun with a mix of fear and desire. One small misstep could tip us over the edge. I wanted to retreat, to regain composure, but some invisible force kept me rooted, drawn toward the very closeness I should resist. He stepped even closer, ostensibly to pick up a fallen cloth, and the air between us seemed to hum with unspoken possibilities. I could smell his cologne, warm and familiar, and it made my stomach twist in anticipation. Every second stretched longer, each heartbeat echoing in my ears. I wanted to look at him, to read his thoughts, but the intensity of the moment made it impossible to focus on anything but the pull between us. We were alone. The quiet house seemed to shrink around us, walls closing in as if conspiring to trap us in this suspended instant. My hands trembled slightly as I lowered the rag, aware that one shared glance, one careless movement, could ignite the tension that had been simmering for months. And then, as if sensing my hesitation, he leaned just a fraction closer, so near that the warmth of his presence brushed against my cheek. Time slowed, the mundane world falling away until all that existed was the charged space between us. My breath hitched. I wanted to step back, but my body refused. And just as our eyes locked, the moment poised on the edge of something irreversible, the sound of a phone buzzing broke the silence. Both of us froze, caught between desire and interruption. The quiet hum of the house was broken only by the faint ticking of a clock, yet the room felt louder than ever. Every heartbeat, every breath, seemed magnified as I stayed on my knees, trying to steady myself. He was just a step behind me, the warmth of his presence brushing against my back like a living shadow. The tension was electric, almost unbearable, but I had no idea what would come next. "I need to tell you something," he said suddenly, his voice low and steady, pulling my gaze upward. My stomach twisted. I had been imagining countless scenarios, but none of them prepared me for the intensity in his eyes. There was no teasing this time, just raw honesty, the kind that makes your chest feel too small for your heart. My hands froze mid-motion, and I swallowed hard. "What is it?" I managed, though part of me already knew it wouldn't be simple. He stepped closer, and for a moment, our faces were so near I could see the small details I'd never noticed before, the way his eyebrows slightly furrowed when he was conflicted, the faint curve of a smile that betrayed a hidden amusement. I've been holding back for months," he confessed. "Not just about how I feel, but about everything. About us. About how I've wanted this us to mean more than we let it." My breath caught. Months of unspoken longing, stolen glances, subtle touches, all of it suddenly clicked. My pulse raced not from fear, but from the sheer weight of emotions we'd buried under small talk and polite laughter. I had suspected, hoped, but hearing it aloud made the air between us shimmer with unrestrained tension. Before I could respond, a new layer of shock hit. He reached for a small envelope on the counter, sliding it toward me. I hesitated, then took it, unfolding the note inside. My eyes widened as I read. He had been planning to confess something bigger than attraction, a truth that could change everything. It wasn't betrayal in the way I feared, but it was a revelation about his past, about choices and regrets that had kept him cautious, restrained, and secretly yearning for me. I looked up, emotions whirling, relief, disbelief, longing, and fear all at once. He was watching me closely, waiting, unsure of what my reaction would be. The charged air between us seemed to pulse, a current of vulnerability and connection that neither of us could deny. We stood there, close enough to touch, yet suspended in a moment that felt endless. The revelation had shifted everything, yet nothing had changed physically, but the emotional gravity had tilted the room, pulling us towards something inevitable. And then, just as I opened my mouth to speak, the envelope slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor. The sound echoed in the silence, and we froze, caught in the cliffhanger of unspoken possibilities, hearts hammering, knowing that whatever happened next could alter the course of us forever. The envelope still lay on the floor between us, a tangible reminder of truths we'd both skirted around for too long. I finally stood, brushing imaginary dust from my knees, but my hands trembled. He stepped closer, his expression open, raw, waiting for me to respond to the confession he'd laid bare. I didn't know. I suspected something, but I trailed off, words failing against the intensity of the moment. He reached out, not to touch me, but to guide me toward the small sofa near the window. The late afternoon sunlight spilled across the room, softening the edges of our tension but not diluting it. "I've been scared," he admitted, voice low, almost breaking. "Scared of what it would mean if I let myself care too much. Scared of losing you before we even tried." My heart thudded, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The months of restrained glances, playful teasing, and stolen moments had built to this. We were forced to confront the consequences of what we'd ignored, the desires we'd held back, and the vulnerability we'd avoided. "You don't have to explain everything right now," I whispered, taking a step closer. "I just needed to know you felt the same way." He smiled faintly, and for the first time in a long while, that mischievous spark returned, tempered now by honesty. "I do. I've always felt it, just didn't know how to say it without messing everything up. The tension in the room shifted from uncertainty to a shared understanding, a release that made the air feel lighter but still charged. We sat side by side on the sofa, close but not rushing, letting the silence speak volumes. Each glance, each subtle smile, was an acknowledgement that the emotional storm had passed, and we were on steady ground together. Yet there was still a hint of suspense lingering. This was resolution, not conclusion. The envelope, the confession, the unspoken desires had cleared the air, but it also marked the beginning of something new. We were no longer dancing around hidden truths, we had faced them, and now the path forward was open, uncertain, and thrilling. As the sunlight faded, I felt the closeness between us, the shared heartbeat of relief, anticipation, and longing. He reached for my hand, a simple, deliberate touch that grounded us both. The moment was not explosive, not reckless, but profound, a quiet acknowledgement of all we'd been through and a promise of what could come next. And in that charged, tender silence, I realized that the climax wasn't just the confession, it was the choice to stay, to embrace what had been waiting beneath the surface all along. The late afternoon sunlight softened into a warm, golden glow, casting gentle highlights across the living room. We sat side by side on the sofa, close enough that the space between us felt like it had disappeared entirely. The tension that had defined our every glance, every touch, had melted into something far deeper, comfort, understanding, and a quiet joy that neither of us had dared hope for before. He reached for my hand, fingers brushing against mine in a tender, deliberate way. I felt a shiver, not of fear or uncertainty, but of connection, of shared relief. Our hands intertwined naturally, as if they had always belonged together, forming a bridge over months of unspoken longing. I never wanted to hide how I felt, he murmured, his voice soft but unwavering. I just didn't know how to start. You don't have to hide anything from me, I replied, squeezing his hand gently. We've already found our way here. We laughed softly at the weight of all the tension we'd carried, the near misses and stolen moments that had kept us on edge for far too long. And then we simply leaned into each other, a quiet understanding passing between us without words. The warmth of his shoulder against mine, the soft rhythm of his breath, the light in his eyes, it was all the reassurance I needed. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting a golden haze that seemed to wrap the room in serenity. We didn't rush, didn't force the moment. Instead, we let it unfold naturally, savoring the stillness and the connection. Every smile, every small gesture, every lingering look built a foundation stronger than the uncertainty that had preceded it. I think this is the start of something real, he said quietly, resting his forehead lightly against mine. Yes, I breathed, smiling. Something worth everything. Time seemed to slow, allowing us to bask in the quiet intimacy of the moment. There were no dramatic gestures, no forced declarations, just a mutual understanding, a bond forged through honesty, vulnerability, and shared desire. The tension that had once defined us had transformed into something warm, tender, and enduring. As the light faded and evening settled in, I realized that we had finally crossed the invisible line, not with recklessness, but with trust, honesty, and the kind of connection that made the world feel small and safe, just for the two of us. It was the perfect, quiet culmination of months of longing and hesitation, leaving both our hearts full and content.